always believed in love. Growing up in Nairobi's Eastlands, she had watched her mother endure years of hardship with her father, and she thought that love was the glue that held everything together. When she met Michael, she believed he was different. He was charming, articulate, and ambitious. He promised her the world, and for a while, he delivered just enough of it to keep her heart convinced. They got married in a small church in Donholm, surrounded by family and friends. Grace remembered her mother's words on that day. "No marriage is perfect, my daughter. What matters is forgiveness and patience. A woman holds the home together." Grace carried those words like scripture, almost tattooed onto her soul. At first, life with Michael seemed beautiful. He worked as an IT technician in the CBD, while she managed a small salon in Umoja. They rented a modest apartment, dreamed of buying land in Kitengela, and often spoke about building a future together. Michael was playful, bringing her little gifts and calling her his queen. Grace, on her part, cooked his favorite meals, ironed his shirts before work, and prayed for him every Sunday at church. But things began to change, slowly, almost invisibly. The first time Grace suspected Michael of cheating was 2 years into their marriage. He had started coming home late, reeking of alcohol and unfamiliar perfume. One night, his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. Grace, though hesitant, glanced at the screen. The message read, "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." Her heart sank. She felt her hands tremble, the phone almost slipping from her grasp. When she confronted him, Michael laughed it off. "Grace, don't let small things ruin us. She's just a friend. You know people like to exaggerate." He kissed her forehead, held her close, and whispered that she was the only woman he loved. Grace wanted to believe him. She forced herself to. After all, what would society say if their marriage crumbled just after 2 years? Her friends would whisper, her family would be disappointed, and the church would judge. So she forgave him. But the signs kept piling up. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Sometimes his shirts carried traces of lipstick. Sometimes he avoided her touch altogether. Each time, Grace confronted him, and each time, Michael had a smooth excuse: ready, work, stress, or you're imagining things. Grace swallowed the excuses because the alternative, leaving, seemed worse. Nairobi society was harsh on divorced women. She had seen how her neighbor, a young woman named Sharon, was ridiculed after leaving her husband for infidelity. People called her impatient and loose, blaming her instead of the man. Grace refused to become another whispered story in women's gatherings. Years passed. Grace gave birth to a baby boy, Daniel. Motherhood brought her joy, and she hoped it would mend her marriage. For a while, Michael was present, doting on his son. But soon, the late nights returned, the lies resurfaced, and Grace's tears became routine. She often cried silently at night, careful not to wake Daniel. She prayed harder, fasted even, begging God to change her husband's heart. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Forgive, my daughter. Hold your home together." One day, Grace's friend Anita paid her a visit. Anita was outspoken, the kind of woman who didn't sugarcoat her words. As they sat in the salon Grace owned, Anita looked her in the eye and said, "Grace, you're killing yourself slowly. Everyone in town knows Michael has women all over. You can't keep forgiving him forever." Grace forced a smile. "People change, Anita. I believe he will change." Anita shook her head. "Don't let society's judgment be the reason you bury yourself alive. Think of Daniel. Think of your health." Those words stayed with Grace. They haunted her especially when Michael started disappearing for entire weekends. Once, he came home drunk, muttering another woman's name in his sleep. Grace wept silently beside him, asking herself why love had to hurt so much. Then came the day that would change everything. Grace had been feeling unwell for weeks. Fatigue weighed her down, and she noticed unusual infections that wouldn't go away. At first, she brushed it off as stress and exhaustion. But one morning, while braiding a client's hair at the salon, she nearly fainted. Her client insisted she go to the hospital. Reluctantly, Grace went to Kenyatta National Hospital. After routine tests, the doctor suggested she undergo a full screening, including an HIV test. Grace's heart pounded. She wasn't the type who feared hospitals, but something inside her whispered that her life was about to change. 2 days later, she returned for the results. The doctor looked at her with solemn eyes. He asked her to sit down. Grace's palms were sweaty, her throat dry. The doctor's voice felt distant, almost like an echo. "Grace, your test came back positive for HIV. You also have multiple sexually transmitted infections. I'm so sorry." The room spun. Grace clutched the edge of the chair, her breath shallow. She wanted to scream, to collapse, to rewind time and erase every moment she forgave Michael. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. "No, no, there must be a mistake," she whispered. But the doctor's words were final. He offered counseling, medication, and hope for living positively. But Grace wasn't listening. All she could see was her son's face. All she could hear was her mother's advice. And all she could feel was the crushing weight of silence. When she got home, Michael was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Grace stared at him, her eyes burning with fury and despair. "Michael, I went for a test today," she said, her voice trembling. He barely looked up, and "I'm HIV positive, and I have other infections too. From you." Michael froze. His face went pale, his phone slipping from his hand. He stammered, searching for words, but none came out. For the first time, Grace saw fear in his eyes. "Grace, I didn't." "Don't you dare," she screamed, her voice shaking the walls. "Don't you dare lie to me again. You destroyed me. You destroyed our family because you couldn't keep your vows." Daniel stirred in his sleep in the next room. Grace lowered her voice, sobbing. "I forgave you, Michael, again and again, because I was afraid of what people would say, because I thought marriage was about endurance. And now look at me. Look at what you've done to me." Michael buried his face in his hands, muttering apologies that meant nothing. Grace realized in that moment that apologies couldn't cure her, couldn't undo the damage. She felt betrayed not just by her husband, but by society, by the teachings that told her to suffer in silence for the sake of appearances. In the days that followed, Grace began her treatment at Kenyatta Hospital. She swallowed her ARVs every evening, sometimes crying as she did so. She confided in Anita, who stood by her side, encouraging her to stay strong. But the stigma was unbearable. When whispers spread in the neighborhood about her status, some clients stopped coming to her salon. Church members offered forced smiles, but avoided sitting next to her. Even her own relatives treated her with caution. Michael, ashamed and guilty, tried to make amends. He went for testing and was also found positive. But instead of supporting Grace, he drowned himself in alcohol, blaming her for not protecting herself. Grace realized he would never change. One night, after tucking Daniel into bed, Grace sat alone on the balcony of their apartment in Umoja. The city lights flickered in the distance. Matt Hattis honked in the night, and laughter drifted from a nearby bar. Grace felt an emptiness inside her, but also a strange kind of strength. She realized her story wasn't just about pain. It was also about survival. She thought of all the women in Nairobi, in Kenya, who stayed in broken marriages because of fear of judgment, fear of loneliness, fear of shame. She thought of how silence had almost killed her, and she made a decision. Grace started speaking out. With Anita's help, she joined a local support group for women living with HIV. She shared her story raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. She told them about forgiveness, about fear, about how society's pressure nearly cost her life. Slowly, her words began to empower others. Women came to her privately, confessing their struggles, asking for advice. She became a voice in her community, reminding women that their health and dignity mattered more than societal whispers. She told them, silence kills. Don't let anyone shame you into suffering. Grace was still living with HIV, still battling stigma, still raising her son alone. But she was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a teacher, a warning, and a beacon of hope. And every night, when she looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully, she whispered to herself, I will live, not for Michael,